Republican Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning and good to have you here, Senator.
Good to be on with you, Margaret.
You raised concerns earlier this week that China was giving misleading information about what's happening. President Trump has since thanked China for its transparency. Have your concerns abated?
So, Margaret, given China's record of dishonesty and incompetence when it comes to dealing with these public health emergencies like the SARS outbreak in 2003, I think this is a case where an ounce of prevention truly does equal a pound of cure. We know from the outset earlier this month that local Chinese authorities in Wuhan and in Hubei province were not as forthcoming, not as quick as they should be. As we heard in the report, Xi Jinping has now said they're going to try to centralize the response to this. Hopefully they'll be more transparent. Obviously things that are very fast-breaking, even since the president said what he did just a couple days ago.
So you think they are getting more transparent?
They're apparently moving that direction.
Okay.
Again, I think we should be skeptical of China because they have a history of dishonesty when it comes to these kind of outbreaks, and this is a very serious matter.
And they're putting in some travel restrictions internally, but do you think, as you suggested in a letter earlier this week, that there needs to be a ban on entry to the U.S. from China?
So right now what the CDC has done is try to direct all air traffic from Wuhan into a handful of American airports. If that doesn't control the situation, we may need to look at expanding that from all Chinese travel into the United States. I also think it would be appropriate for the Food and Drug Administration to expedite on an emergency basis approval for testing kits to state and local governments, so you're not just depending on the federal government to test these things. But again, we need to get ahead of this problem, and given China's record of dishonesty when it comes to these public health emergencies, we truly do need to use an ounce of prevention here rather than having to use a pound of cure in a few months.
I want to ask you about politics here at home. Mitt Romney, one of your Republican colleagues, says he is likely to vote to call witnesses in the impeachment trial. How many other Republicans do you expect to vote to approve witnesses and evidence?
I don't know, Margaret. I'm not going to vote to approve witnesses because the House Democrats have had lots of witnesses. We heard from them over and over and over again this week. We don't need to prolong what's already taken 5 months of the American people's time. The House Democrats have not proven their case against Donald Trump. We don't need to prolong this matter. What we saw last week.
Do you have a sense, though, that there is a chance there could be witnesses? Will there be those 4 Republicans crossing?
I don't want to forecast the way other senators may vote, but I would just say the last 5 days have kind of been a microcosm of the last 5 months. We listened to Adam Schiff drone on for 3 days, and then the president's lawyers, in just 2 hours, demolished the case that he had made.
They also have 24 hours over 3 days.
And I don't think they're going to use them, but yesterday they used just 2 hours, and they demolished the case that the House Democrats had presented using selective, misrepresented quotes from tape, using transcripts that were out of context, or just generally fulminating about how enraged they are that Donald Trump is still the president.
You were scribbling notes during the trial. Some of our reporters in the room saw you doing that. And I wonder, since you say we should be getting this over with, if you actually do have questions, because senators do get to submit them and have them responded to in the next week. Do you want anything answered?
Well, we'll have 16 hours of questions, so we'll have plenty of time for questions.
And do you have any?
Well, I think given the House Democrats' presentation, there are now real questions about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's conduct. I mean, they spent hours trying to explain away what Hunter Biden did going to work for a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch, and Joe Biden intervening to get that oligarch fired just days after his house was raided by investigators. I think those are serious and legitimate questions.
But you would need to vote to approve witnesses to hear from the Bidens, which you just said you're not going to do.
I'd like to hear what Adam Schiff has to say about those facts that he, again, glossed over that I know the White House counsel is going to present.
But you're not going to vote to approve witnesses?
I do not think that we need more witnesses or documents. The House had 17 different witnesses. We saw hours of their testimony this last week. They had 28,000 pages of documents. They're not upset that they haven't had witnesses. They're upset that their witnesses haven't said what they want them to say.
And I want to just on the Biden front, I know the president's lawyers we do anticipate that they will talk about that at length. Let's talk about what they did already present on. Do you think it was a misstep for one of the president's lawyers, Jay Sekulow, to stand on the floor of the Senate and repeat the conspiracy theory that Ukraine meddled in the 2016 election?
Margaret, that's not a conspiracy theory.
Senator John Thune, one of your Republican colleagues, said he would prefer that the lawyers not do that because the intelligence community concluded that it was Russia that meddled.
So Margaret, that's a Democratic talking point.
This is what John Thune, one of the Republican leaders, said.
It's a Democratic talking point that the president and his lawyers have argued that it was Ukraine who interfered in our elections, not Russia. You can read the president's brief. They make it very clear that, yes, you can accept that Russia interfered in a systematic, organized, top-down fashion in our election. I say that. I've been part of the Intelligence Committee that's been investigating it for years. You can also say that it's clear some Ukrainian officials tried to influence the outcome of the election in 2016.
But you're being
Both
precise
of those things
in
can be true.
your words there, and that was not what the president's lawyers said.
I'm saying exactly what the president's brief says. You can also say that countries like China and Iran and North Korea try to influence our election as well. Both of those things can be true.
But you do know that the Trump appointed election czar at the Director of National Intelligence said, "We do not assess that any other country influenced the United States election in 2016 on the scale of what the Russians did." That's an exact quote from Shelby Pearson.
But that's consistent with my point. I said on the scale of Russia was top-down, organized, systematic.
So would you caution the president's lawyers to be more precise in their language
The
then?
Ukrainian ambassador published an op-ed saying that, or criticizing Donald Trump and defending Hillary Clinton. These are not disputed facts. These are not disputed facts.
But that's not what the president's lawyer said on the floor. Putting that aside for a moment, what can we expect from the committee you sit on, Senate Intelligence, in terms of further reports on what Russia, as you just said, did do in the 2016 election?
We're going through the declassification process on many of these reports. I think we'll be releasing more information soon. I expect one more set of reports to come out later this year. But one thing I think you'll see, too, is that when you look back at the 2016 election, there's a lot that the Obama administration could have done at an earlier stage to prevent Russia from interfering to the extent that it did.
There's now this 90-minute long recording that CBS and other networks have where President Trump speaks at length with two of Rudy Giuliani's business associates who were involved in that pressure campaign in Ukraine. We played some of it at the top of the show. When the president says, "Get rid of," take her out, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Given that the president previously said he didn't even know these men, doesn't it trouble you that we now have recordings of him discussing this issue in Ukraine with them?
No, Margaret. And this reminds me a lot of what happened in the Brett Kavanaugh case when the Democrats kept releasing supposed bombshells. I mean, I think all we're missing here is Michael Avenatti to come out and defend someone as well.
You don't think this recording is damaging in any way?
Let's look at the context of this report. That video was more than a year before he asked Maria Yovanovitch to be removed. And he was told in that video, we just heard, that she's running around Kiev, bad-mouthing you and saying that you're going to be impeached. The president has the right to remove any ambassador for any reason or no reason whatsoever. An ambassador bad-mouthing the president is a pretty sound reason to remove an ambassador.
The president absolutely has the right to do that, but I think the question is why these business associates who have a financial and political interest in the matter were advising the president, and he responded and said, "Okay, take her out."
I would point out, though, that that video occurred more than a year after she was removed.
Right, and so it goes to show that pressure.
But it goes to show the president he was not hasty, he was not precipitous. He didn't just act on the word of these people. He waited more than a year and got more information as well. So I think the video, again, it reminds me a lot of what we saw in the Kavanaugh controversy, and I don't think it influences the votes of any senators that I've heard.
I want to ask you in another matter, Iran. We now know from the Pentagon that the number is 34 Americans who were injured when Iran fired those ballistic missiles into a base and injured these Americans. The Pentagon now says half of them are receiving treatment. What is their status? How serious are the injuries?
So the military does a lot better job than it did 15 or 20 years ago when it comes to brain injuries. You know, when I was in Iraq, if your truck got blown up, you went and got your eyes checked out and were probably sent on your way. Do a much better job today than they did then. But there's also
I want to play, though. Here's how the president described it when he was asked about these injuries.
I heard that they had headaches and a couple of other things, but I would say, and I can report, it is not very serious.
So I think
veterans groups are calling for the president to apologize. Should he apologize for calling it not very serious?
He's not dismissing their injuries. He's describing.
He said they're headaches and not very serious.
I think he's describing their injuries. He's not dismissing their injuries. Head injuries can be
he
on
said
anywhere.
Headaches. I don't consider them very serious.
Well, that's like saying that having a flesh wound is not very serious.
Well,
and
veterans
having
groups, and I know you're a veteran, and I know you
No,
know
and
people who've
veterans can
suffered
have-
from
veterans
TBI,
can have
as
different
do
point of
I.
view.
Don't you think it's serious and that the president may need to apologize?
I mean, if they are in fact, if all these injuries are not serious, if they're on the less serious side of the scale than the severe traumatic side of the scale, the president is just describing what happened to him. He's not dismissing them.
So you consider TBI a serious injury?
Yes, but it
Okay.
is, again, there's a big scale of that can be, return to duty in one day or
Okay.
have severe traumatic lasting injury. And I think he's
Okay.
describing, thankfully, what end of the scale that lies on.
Senator Cotton, thank you for your time today. We'll be
Thank
back.
you.